Breaking tonight, new attention on an issue dominating the discussion since Election Day. With America about to see the start of Donald Trump's presidency and an administration that seems ready and willing to rewrite the rules for dealing with the press. The question now, what does this mean for the media and for the country? Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Since announcing his candidacy in June of 2015, Donald Trump morphed into a national phenomenon, captivating the country, dominating news cycles day in and day out, and creating a white-hot debate about our national media like nothing we have seen in a long, long time. Tonight, we have a candid conversation with some of the best-known reporters and media critics in the country, here to reflect on the media's highs, its lows, and what lies ahead. Beginning tonight with Media Buzz host Howie Kurtz. Hi, Howie.
Hey, Megyn. You know, from the moment Donald Trump descended on the Trump Tower escalator, and especially when he attacked Mexican immigrants as rapists, most of the media wrote off his candidacy.
We better be ready for the fact that he might be leading the Republican ticket next. I know you don't believe that, but I want to go on.
And the cycle kept repeating itself, as when Trump criticized former POW John McCain, saying he preferred military men who weren't captured.
I don't know the fitness that Donald Trump possesses to be commenting on other people's heroism. The most lethal foe that he has ever faced in his own life, I think, was Rosie O'Donnell.
He's not a real legitimate candidate, but he is number one or number two. You do have to cover him.
And again when he proposed a temporary ban on Muslim immigrants.
Are you a bigot? Not at all. Probably the least of anybody you've ever met. You're increasingly being compared to Hitler. Does that give you any pause at all?
No, because what I'm doing is no different than what FDR's solution for Germans, Italians, Japanese, you know.
Some pundits said Trump had self-destructed when he attacked a Mexican-American judge, again when he attacked the Gold Star family, and some said he was toast after the Access Hollywood tape on which he talked about how his celebrity status enabled him to kiss and grope women.
I honestly feel like there's a pretty good chance we don't know who the Republican candidate is for president by the end of this weekend.
Will this kill his campaign? I think this could be it.
And after the third debate, when he wouldn't promise to accept the election outcome?
He may as well have laid down in his own coffin with a hammer and nail and pounded it in himself. But by saying he won't accept the results of the election, that was just a lights-out moment in American politics.
2 days before the election, with virtually all of the media establishment saying all signs pointed to a Hillary Clinton victory, I had to ask this question. A number of pundits came out 2 weeks ago, said this race was over, done, Hillary was going to win, who's going to be in her cabinet, no way Trump could pull this thing off. Was that, in retrospect, reckless?
It was in a way, because throughout the primary, the media kept saying that Donald Trump couldn't win the primary, and then he kept winning state after state after state and became the nominee.
And now the media are calling him president-elect.
A question for you, Howie, though. When you go through those controversies, you know, were people, like all these media reporters, were they writing him off as a group, or were they asking the question, is this the end of Trump? Because there's a difference between those two.
There was a real mixture, Megyn. Some of them were writing him off. This guy is never going to win the nomination or the election. Some were saying, wow, he seems to be seriously wounded. Well, he's never going to survive this. All of that we rehearsed and talked about over and over and over again. They really never quite grasped the nature of his appeal to working-class voters, and now scrambling for other explanations. It's Russian hackers. It's a bunch of Yahoo racists who voted for him. It's the media's fault. Still not fully grasping or accepting that Donald Trump won this election.
Howie, good to see you. So as Howie just mentioned, the media not only discounted Donald Trump's chances of winning the White House, but many openly laughed at the possibility. Here on the Kelly File, we kept a close eye on the polls, too, which suggested he was going to lose, but also the trends, which wound up serving our audience rather well. Over the past 5 months, some context now on the polling. Watch this. Even when Hillary Clinton's lead appeared to be getting to the point of insurmountable, Donald Trump has repeatedly been able to bounce back. For example, in early May, he was down 6.5 points, only to move ahead just 2 weeks later. It happened again over the summer. In late June, the businessman was trailing the former Secretary of State by nearly 7 points. 4 weeks later, just after the Republican National Convention, he was back in the lead. And it was a similar story at the end of August. He trailed by nearly 6 points. He had attacked the Khan family, all that nonsense after the Democrats' convention. Just over 2 weeks later, it was a dead heat. Today, Hillary Clinton is ahead, but just over 6% in the Real Clear Politics average of all polls. And the question now is whether Trump can once again be the new comeback kid as we approach Election Day. And now we know the answer. Even after Election Day, many reporters have continued to treat Mr. Trump as though he's still campaigning and could somehow possibly lose. Some observers say it's almost as if they are refusing to come to grips with the depth of the Trump support. Joining me now to discuss it all, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, Jim Rutenberg, columnist at The New York Times, and David Zerowick, media critic at The Baltimore Sun. Great to have you all here. An esteemed panel. If you don't follow media circles, you can do no better than this panel right here. So this is great. Let's just pick up on Jim where that left off, about the fact that you had people openly laughing at him. Yes, he created a lot of controversy, but was there an unwillingness in much of the media to even entertain the notion that he could win?
I think there was, and I think it was sort of became very self-fulfilling, right? And some of it was people's establishment sources in Republican politics, because let's face it, most of the sources in Republican politics are establishment for mainstream reporters. We're telling them this can't happen. They were looking at the polls, and they're also sort of a bubbleitis, right? And I wrote, a lot has been how the mainstream press failed to understand what was going on throughout the country, and they repeatedly made that mistake. Even when it led them astray, they didn't learn the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So
why didn't they understand what was happening?
I think that they would figure it out after the primaries, like, okay, he got the nomination, but then we missed this, right? But somehow, and maybe it was the polling, maybe it was the almighty data that took over, sure, there's some bias in the mix, and it became, okay, well, he can't win the general election. Mm-hmm. So it's the failure to learn from mistakes, which has to stop now, yesterday.
In defense of the press, Molly, we'd never seen controversies like this with a modern-day presidential candidate, right? And so when you go after a Gold Star family, as he did, and when you talk about this Miss Universe contestant, which was obviously a trap for him, but he rolled around in it, he loved his trap, needing to lose weight, and she was too big, and all that, it was no one criticizing John McCain. Those were actual controversies that you could see how it would lead people based on, a couple hundred years of experience to say, how could he possibly? No? Are we being too tough on the media?
Certainly unlike any other candidate that we had seen in the modern era. At the same time, in addition to these controversies, there was a lot of policy issues that people were resonating with. He spoke to concerns about how we fight wars, how we handle our immigration, what our national security should be like, whether our economic system is benefiting who we want it to benefit. He also talked about these things at the same time that he was talking about all these other sort of shinier distractions. And it would have been good for the media to realize that those issues were resonating, not just because Trump was doing a good job communicating with people on them, but that Hillary Clinton was not.
Mm-hmm. What about the fact that the media, they rely on polls? And I think about 4 years ago when Mitt Romney was running, and it was neck and neck, according to a lot of these polls, but there were a couple pollsters like Rasmussen that kept saying he was going to win. And there were some people who were saying he could still win, he could win, look at Rasmussen, and all the other polls showed it tight, but weren't really showing him ahead, Mitt Romney ahead. Then we get to election night and Barack Obama wins easily. So this time around, all the polls, except for really that LA Times poll, which was this unusual experiment, and in the last week or so, the IBD poll, all of them were showing that Trump was going to lose. Yeah. And so what responsibility did the media have, to contextualize these polls, to accept the polls, or to question the polls in their reporting?
Megyn, I think we should have questioned those polls repeatedly during that election, but the polls fit the stereotypes in the head of the national media. When Howie said there's a bunch of Yahoo racists out there, which the media still, some are characterizing. The people in Wisconsin, where I come from, as that's how they voted for Trump. No other explanation. The mistake that was made is we did not go out into America and get to know who those people were. Mm-hmm. We relied on somebody in New York or Washington or wherever giving us poll data, telling us what they were in a statistical profile, instead of really old-fashioned legacy journalism. And God knows, look, as stripped down as the media is today, we have enough resources to go to Wisconsin and talk to people. And by the way, we can do better than going to a diner and talking about how much pancakes they eat and how silly their sweatshirts look. Really engage the people in this country in a conversation. If we had done even a little of that, Megyn, we would not have missed this colossal cultural shift. The story of Trump's victory is one of the greatest cultural stories in decades. And we missed it cold. Everybody missed it. It's unbelievable. I take that back. I don't want to get carried away. Everybody didn't miss it. Some of us were saying, hey, you know, just what you did, just the segment they ran, you know. Hey, he caught up, he caught up. Some people were...
Don't write him off.
Exactly, exactly. Not everybody missed it, but you know that the major players were saying it was impossible. You know what? I think the irony, God punishing the Clintons, was that they believed it, too, that she believed it, and she didn't go to Wisconsin.
The truth is, though, the truth is, and there are many Trump supporters now, public Trump supporters, who are like, I told you so, I told you so. But the truth is, most Trump supporters, except those on the very, very inner circle, also thought he was going to lose.
Yes.
And I know a lot of them very well, and they didn't want him to lose, but they were completely convinced all the way up to Election Day that he was going to lose. Even Trump has suggested that he believed that based on the polls. So it's fine for them now to turn around and say, we knew, we had our finger on the pulse, but everybody else was an idiot. But the truth is, the data were suggesting, and the data were wrong.
Right. But, you know, you asked the question, should reporters have been more skeptical of polls? And the lesson from 4 years ago was skepticism of the polls could lead people astray.
That's right.
This year was the kind of the opposite lesson. But
the hidden Romney vote that people were talking about,
and people were
didn't show up, and the hidden Trump vote did.
And it didn't serve Romney's campaign for people to think he had it in the bag. You know, your supporters aren't going to get out in the same way, so it's in nobody's interest. This year's the opposite lesson, but it goes back to what David said, is I've noticed over the years that political reporting has gotten much more poll-focused. It's just taken over because of the advent of data, whatever.
Yes.
And less man-on-the-street interviews. It became sort of passé in the business. Not entirely, right? But so the lesson here is I'm still not at a place where I want to say be skeptical of polls, right? Like we know now in the polling industry,
I think people are going to be.
And
I think that ship has sailed.
We shouldn't ignore also that the media had a role to play in the failure of these polls. They made it so unacceptable to publicly admit that you were a Trump voter. And you know, one of the few pollsters who actually did a pretty good job with this, his name is Robert Cahaly. He asked people not just who they were voting for, but who their neighbors were voting for. And they were much more forthright when talking about who their neighbors were voting for.
Oh, yeah. But here's the interesting thing is I remember talking to people and saying, is there a hidden Trump vote that's not, you know, out there and speaking to pollsters? And you got this, there's this expert thing that comes off of the sort of pundit class sometimes of, no, that does not exist.
Yes.
So most people are saying it doesn't exist.
Hence
and with such
the
authority.
word hidden. That was not the best question you've ever asked. All right.
That's why I'm impressed.
Stay tuned. We have a lot more to cover, including ahead some of the administration's closest advisors recently raised new questions about how the incoming Trump administration will deal with reporters during his 4 to 8 years in office. What that means for you, next. Well, almost from the start of his campaign, Mr. Trump made it clear that he would run against the media. And while he has softened that message the tiniest bit since Election Day, some of his closest advisors are saying things need to change. House Speaker Newt Gingrich, the former House Speaker, suggested that President Trump could just do away with presidential news conferences, telling USA Today, quote, "The news media so totally disgraced itself in this election. If I were Trump, I would just say no. And if the White House Correspondents Association doesn't like it, I'd say fine, disband." Back with us now, Howie Kurtz. How about that, Howie? Just disband.
Just disband. But you know, Megyn, Donald Trump won the presidency in part by doing hundreds of interviews and holding raucous news conferences. And while making himself endlessly available, he constantly castigated the press.
There's great dishonesty in the media, and I didn't see it to the same extent with the financial media. You know, I've only been a politician now for 3 months, but they don't want to cover me accurately. I see such dishonesty. They have a couple of sites like Politico. It's totally dishonest.
At the same time, Trump has weaponized Twitter, often using it to attack news outlets and journalists by name. The messages to his 17 million followers inevitably amplified by the media. The president-elect recently fired off these tweets. Has anyone looked at the really poor numbers of Vanity Fair magazine? Way down. Big trouble. Dead. Graydon Carter, no talent, will be out. And just watched NBC Nightly News. So biased, inaccurate, and bad. Point after point. Just can't get much worse, although CNN is right up there. Now, some key Trump advisors are suggesting he may rely more on social media as a way of circumventing and dissing the press corps based at the White House. Newt Gingrich would shake up the prime seating for major news organizations.
I don't remember if the number is 850, but a substantial number of members of the White House Correspondents Association.
Right.
Maybe you'd rotate the seats around among all of them.
Interesting academic exercise, but, you know, we know that you're not a big fan of the mainstream media. We saw that when you ran for president 4 years ago. So it sounds to some people like, well, you're kind of trying to take some revenge or marginalize the pillars of the establishment.
Why am I trying to marginalize them?
Yeah.
I mean,
you acknowledge it. He acknowledges it. Reince Priebus, Trump's incoming chief of staff, said the Trump team is even reconsidering the daily opportunity for reporters to question the White House spokesman.
I think that many things have to change, and even looking at things like the daily White House briefing from the press secretary. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that things can be done.
Abolishing or curtailing those briefings would amount to a frontal assault on the media by severely limiting access to the one person whose job it is to speak for the administration.
Howie, thank you. Joined again now by Molly Hemingway, Jim Rutenberg of the New York Times, and David Zurowick of the Baltimore Sun. Great to see you. And Molly of the Federalist. I don't know. The average American's probably not shaking in her boots over the thought of the White House press corps having the seating arrangement upended potentially, or not having as much access to the president. Does it matter?
It does matter, and the media are in a real quandary here. I mean, they put their entire credibility on the line, openly campaigning for Hillary Clinton, openly disdaining Donald Trump, writing that they should throw out the textbook manual that says to be objective and instead to be overtly
some
hostile.
Literally argued for that.
Yes, some literally argued that here at this table.
Well, Jim didn't say we should be.
That is not an accurate portrayal of that comment, but you finish your point and I will get to that.
And so they put that credibility on the line, and then they lost. And so it's very difficult to know where things go forward. It's very important to have a press that can be trusted to hold people accountable and to ask questions. Those daily briefings are a very important way to accomplish that. But the credibility of the media is at an all-time low. I mean, there was something earlier this year showing that only 6% of Americans have a great deal of trust in the media. Now, we're in the truth-telling business, so if we don't have that trust, that's a major problem for us.
We got those 6. All right, Jim, give it to her.
I'll answer this, and then I want to also talk about the briefing room, but I'll make it fast. The column that you refer to actually had a
Jim is the media critic for the New York Times, so go ahead.
And there's the column you refer to had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it was the idea that Donald Trump was challenging the norms. And it raised a lot of questions up top, including where does the old rule book fit in? And where that column concluded, which I think stands now, is journalism shouldn't measure itself against one campaign's definition of fairness. It is journalism's job to be true to the readers and viewers and true to the facts in a way that will stand up to history's judgment. And I think that stands. As for the briefing room, the American public will not care if we lose our seats. I get that. I used to sit in that briefing room. But the reason, and maybe David can speak to this too, that the seats were left in the press's control was so it wasn't seen that a White House was choosing who was playing. Now,
that's right.
Mr. Gingrich talked about rotating reporters around. I don't want to speak for the Correspondents Association. Maybe that would be something they would consider.
It's not going to, I mean, that's not going to have a whole heck of a lot of effect. But if there aren't daily press briefings, or if there's just a general attitude of withdrawal from the press and the unwillingness to provide access to reporters and going direct to consumer, as Donald Trump likes to do, eliminating the questioner, the media, what effect does that have?
Well, first of all, let me address the thing. Yes, exactly.
That's the name of my column.
That's the word.
Mediator.
No, I think Jim's point is fair about getting all the way through. But in the media world we live in, I think a lot of people didn't get through. And I think a lot of people on the left took that as license to say, I have a moral obligation as a citizen to bring this man down. He's dangerous.
I would love to have that much influence. I don't, if they read the whole column.
I'm not saying it was righteous that they took that, but they did. And I saw that license and they ran with it, and they became advocacy journalists. And honest, what was so upsetting to me was to see the legacy values of fairness, proportionality, equal treatment thrown out the window because this guy was considered such a hideous and dangerous guy. Even if you consider him that, even if you believe that, the traditional values that I've been socialized to in journalism says you go out of your way to be fair to him. You know, you say to your editor, listen, I find this guy really offensive. Will you push back whenever I write this and you know that's in my head? Because I can't get it out of my head. We're not objective. We're human beings. That's our job. I'm not saying the Times. I'm saying a lot of people took it as license because of the Times.
Molly, you have an interesting post now at the Federalist talking about how no one at this table, but that you feel some of the hand-wringing we're seeing from some in the press about how, you know, we need to be truth tellers and we need to batten down the hatches and we need to, you know, slow and steady, straight ahead. You find it basically hypocritical because you didn't see that same determination perhaps under the Obama years.
Right. It's actually very important that we do our jobs, that we do tell the truth, that we do hold people accountable. But that has to be in the context of it being what we've done forever. And in the last 8 years, we saw a media that was pretty obsequious to the president. They really liked him. You could see that they liked him. And most media outlets were not in an oppositional stance toward him at all, no matter if it was accepting what he claimed about what Obamacare would do or the Iran deal or any number of things. And so it's this call to arms to be brave truth tellers in the face of Trump kind of...
Like take Benghazi. Can you imagine if Benghazi happened on the watch of a President Trump? Do you think the mainstream media would be as quick to move on from it or want to dismiss it the way they did, you know, when it actually happened?
Even more so, think about how that was used as an excuse to put our First Amendment values on the table. We had the President and the Secretary of State questioning the First Amendment, whether you should be free to say what you want about a religion. You had videos going out saying, in this country, we don't disparage other religions. Actually,
we do.
We do.
All the time.
We take it as a point of pride that you are able to do that. And there wasn't a lot of hand-wringing about the dangerous threat to free speech and religious freedom that posed. So when you now hear people say, oh, Trump is a big danger to free speech, it's like, well, where were you for the last 8 years?
Well, first of all, I think some of this, of course, is valid, and plenty of it is. But some of it, I think, there's an element at times of where you stand is where you sit. Is that the cliche that, you know, if you have a certain outlook, then you're not hard enough on Trump. You're not hard enough on Hillary. I mean, ask Hillary Clinton voters what they think of the press coverage, and they'll say something different. But you're right that the same standards have to apply all the time. And in terms of President Obama, look. He was a threat at times to press freedoms. My newspaper editorialized against him about that.
We'll get to him in a minute.
But one thing is that you did have Mr. Trump, who had a blacklist against reporters. There were things we had not seen
may I submit to you that Barack Obama had a blacklist against reporters who happen to work at this news channel as well?
Well, he wouldn't interview with me either. I'm on the list.
Never once. All right, and take Hillary Clinton. All of her time out there saying what a fantastic journalist I am, which she was using because she knew Trump had attacked me. She was using to try to curry favor with certain voting blocs. I asked her 50 ways from Sunday to come on this program through everyone I could possibly ask her. She wouldn't do it. And the reason, I think, was she was scared, but also her team didn't want to legitimize Fox News. And yet, you know, people who didn't call her out at all are now shocked and horrified that Donald Trump might not sit with certain news reporters or organizations.
I loved it that you called her out. Can I say one thing about Trump and dealing with the press?
Yeah.
It's not going to be pretty.
He told the New York Times they're going to be happy. I've been saying all along, no, they're not.
He has a model between television and social media. He found this sweet spot in this era of transition. He can use TV great when he does live TV, and he has this voice, a 70-year-old man with the perfect voice in Twitter. It's snarky, it's nasty, it's ugly, and it resonates. He doesn't need the media. Until the media somehow convinces him, you need us, he's not going to use it. He's going to end run it because it's double pleasure. He gets his message directly to people, and he gets to kick the New York Times and CNN and whoever he's mad at in the teeth.
I'll steal the final word on this because I did have most of that presidential election without access to Donald Trump. And granted, he wasn't the president. But in a way, it was a gift because I never needed access. And I could just cover him fairly without having to worry about any blowback. I mean, I was going to get blowback, but it didn't matter. And our viewers rewarded us. You know, our ratings stayed high the whole year. I think people still respond to fair journalism. They understand what's really going on. And I think the press still has an opportunity to cover him fairly, even if he does cut off access to them. All right, coming up, ABC News' Dan Abrams faced fierce online backlash after speaking out against the problem of fake news. Why? He's here next.
A Fox News alert, I'm Greg Jarrett. Turkey launching a massive manhunt for a gunman who opened fire on a New Year's celebration. Surveillance videotape showing the attacker shooting his way inside a nightclub jammed with as many as 600 partygoers. 39 people at least are dead, nearly 70 others wounded. No claim of responsibility as yet. President Obama on vacation in Hawaii condemned the attack and offered Turkey whatever it needs. Pope Francis urging world leaders to work together to fight terrorism. He also prayed for the victims of the attack in Turkey. The pontiff delivering his New Year's Day remarks at the Vatican before 50,000 people in St. Peter's Square. He said 2017 will be a good year for those who reject hatred and do good deeds. I'm Greg Jarrett. Now back to the Kelly File special, Trump versus the media. For all your headlines, log on to foxnews.com.
Well, as we've already seen this year, fake news can have some very real and even violent consequences, like when Edgar Welch allegedly fired shots inside of a D.C. pizza place. The suspect was there allegedly investigating what's come to be known as Pizzagate, a conspiracy theory that was circulating online about a child sex slavery ring involving Democrats run out of the restaurant Comet Ping Pong. This is a pizza shop. Joining me now, Dan Abrams, who's chief legal affairs anchor for ABC News and was attacked online after calling out the Pizzagate story as 100% false. Dan, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So you can't do that anymore because they're like, my internet tells me it's so.
Well, or they say, my internet tells me this hasn't been investigated enough, right? So the burden now is on disproving conspiracy theory. So conspiracy theory gets thrown out there with no actual evidence, and then the people who want to believe it say to people who say, well, there's no evidence, this isn't true. The response is, well, that's because you haven't investigated it. And you create this sort of circular nonsense, which puts you in a position where there is no such thing as what's true and what's not true. And that's a dangerous place to be.
Right. But is it more dangerous right now than it was in the past?
Yes.
Do you feel like it's getting worse?
No question.
Why?
Social media. Because the bottom line is that now anyone is a media organization. Anyone who wants to share an item can and does do that, which is generally a good thing. The problem with that is that there's not a filter. Now, some people would say, well, the filter used to be terrible. The mainstream media filter was garbage. Well, it was better than this. And when I say this, I mean no filter at all, which is anything gets thrown out there, anything, people on Facebook. I mean, you watch some people and you say, where'd you get this information? Well, I saw it on Facebook. Well, and you know,
there's a fake article about me getting fired a couple months ago.
I'm sure there was.
Like, oh, no, I was fired. I thought I'd find out by my security card not working any longer, not on Facebook.
Exactly.
But it was nonsense. Facebook had to come out and apologize for it, but this happens all the time.
All the time. And look, it's not that Facebook is writing the articles, right? It's just that people who are using Facebook are distributing it. Now, the one thing I would say that should give some hope to those of us who care and like the media as a whole is that when people are polled, it still shows that 60-something% of them view mainstream media organizations as either credible or very credible. Now, 60-something% isn't where you'd hope it would be, right? You'd hope you'd be in the 80s and the 90s. But it's, high 60s, which says that there's only a minority of people who say, I can't believe anything that comes from the mainstream media. The mainstream media has problems, real issues, but it's not that you can equate mainstream media coverage with fake news.
So what do you think? I mean, we were just talking with our panel, but what do you think in the era of Trump, a journalist's challenge is going to be? How do you cover him? That's what everyone asks.
Well, look, you cover him the way you cover anyone else. The problem is twofold. Number one, he has such disdain for the media. And when I say for the media, for anyone who criticizes him.
That's right.
Right? If you criticize Donald Trump, you're the enemy.
That's why I keep saying the New York Times is not going to be happy. And Donald Trump is not going to be happy with them either.
That's right. But look, this is great for the New York Times, by the way. It's going to make them the sort of the voice to take on Donald Trump. He's going to keep giving them publicity. What Donald Trump did for Vanity Fair, by talking about this failing magazine, this suddenly Vanity, oh yeah, what's Vanity Fair up to these days?
Names in your head, right. Oh my God, J-Lo, I love her.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's not a bad thing when Donald Trump blasts you because he blasts everybody. But from a journalistic point of view, you got to call him out when he's saying things that aren't true. And you know what? If he attacks you, if he insults you, I don't think it's a journalist's responsibility to just sort of sit there and go, well, Donald Trump is attacking me, and I'm not going to say anything. Honestly, I think the way you handled the attacks was ideal. I think that you sort of serve as the model. And I don't say that because we're here. I'd say this to someone else who'd ask me. And the reason for that is because you got to walk a line between not letting it impact you and saying, I'm still going. I'm still going to attack him. I'm still going to challenge him, but I'm not going to do it any more than I would have.
That's right.
If this hadn't happened.
I'm going to be fair. But I will say, just for the record, it can't be, you know, as much as he came after me, that causes a real danger in people's lives. It did in mine. I work for a news organization that has a lot of money and hired me guards, and I was safe. But if he did this to somebody who wasn't in such a fortunate position, it would have real First Amendment implications. And we as media people need to keep an eye on that. That's not fair to the individual reporters.
Oh, and just as important as that is this idea that suddenly you're going to start punishing certain media organizations because they publish things you don't like. I mean, the Washington Post getting banned from covering the Trump campaign. What?
Right.
I mean, that is complete.
But it happened time and time again. It started with Des Moines Register, and down the line it went without many people complaining. And then, you know, now it's a slippery slope.
But that's a constitutional violation.
Absolutely.
That's not right. Okay.
And he is the son of Floyd Abrams, who is the First Amendment expert of them all. He'll be here in the spring talking about his new book. Yep. Great to see you, Dan.
Yeah, good to see you.
So even before President-elect Donald Trump takes office, we are hearing warnings that he represents an unprecedented threat to the freedom of the press. But some of these voices were silent when President Obama was going after Fox News. Well, over the course of the 2016 election and in the days that followed, top journalists and major media organizations issued dire warnings that President-elect Donald Trump represents an unprecedented threat to the freedom of the press. But President Trump would not be the first to find himself at odds with the media. As Howie Kurtz reports, 8 years we've had of President Obama seeming to have a whole lot of trouble with one network in particular.
Look, if I watched Fox News, I wouldn't vote for me either, right?
Now he's taking a parting swipe at Fox, lamenting why white working-class voters turned out heavily for Donald Trump. He told a sympathetic publisher, Rolling Stone's Jan Wenner, part of it is Fox News in every bar and restaurant in big chunks of the country. But part of it is also Democrats not working at a grassroots level. Obama did partially blame his own party, but here's what's striking. The president has the world's biggest bully pulpit, but he often portrays Fox as all but drowning him out.
First of all, I've got one television station that is entirely devoted to attacking my administration. I mean, you know, that's a pretty...
I assume you're talking about Fox.
Well, that's a pretty big megaphone.
That view, promoted by former communications director Anita Dunn, who once told me Fox was a wing of the Republican Party, made no distinction between the network's news and opinion programming. Her boss often invoked Fox in defending Obamacare.
But you don't have to take my word for it. If you talk to somebody who said, well, I don't know, I was watching Fox News and they said this horrible.
Fox journalists would push back when they were excluded from a media blitz.
These guys, everything is personal. I got to tell you, Bill,
everything.
They are the biggest bunch of crybabies I have dealt with in my 30 years in Washington.
His Justice Department also battled the press, seizing phone records from the AP and Fox's chief Washington correspondent James Rosen in leak investigations, and even branding Rosen a criminal co-conspirator. Sometimes Obama uses the channel to argue that the right and the left prefer sympathetic outlets, but lately his Fox fixation seemed to fade.
It's been a while.
Better late than never.
Megyn, President Obama is entitled to challenge what he views as unfair criticism, but at times he has used Fox as a scapegoat. But wow, compared to Trump, Donald Trump is way harsher toward the press, has drawn far more negative media coverage than the outgoing president. Trump, as you know, has repeatedly attacked CNN and the New York Times and has sometimes criticized Fox as well.
Howie, thank you. Back with us again, Molly Hemingway, Jim Rutenberg, and David Zurowick. And we were just talking about some of the attacks he's had on the reporters. And to your point earlier, David, you know, the need, you know, when he was coming after me at the height of, you know, his anger after that debate, and many of his supporters were angry about that question I asked him at the debate, I did what you said. You know, I said to my colleagues on the Kelly file, you check me. You know, I have to have an armed security guard now. I'm under threat. My kids are under threat. And I don't want to go too hard on him to punish him. And I don't want to go too easy on him out of a desire to get him to back off either. You know, you need somebody to have your back.
Yeah, your team came through for you, too, because I was watching at that time, and I thought, okay, this could come. How's she going to react? Let's see, you know? And you did. I thought you were remarkably fair in that. As a matter of fact, when you went and did the interview with him in primetime, people would say, oh, she was too nice to him, you know?
Yeah.
But that was the way you covered him, down the middle. And look, you saw what we was doing on Twitter to you. You know, the other day I said, hey, maybe we should have Twitter mobs for the truth when he lies on Twitter, because he seems to like mobs so much.
Well, you do have to be, I mean, you were in a similar situation, Molly. You do have to, as a journalist covering Donald Trump, you are going to have to understand storms will come and figure out a way to weather them.
Right. There were times when I covered Trump and I was more favorable than other journalists were, and there were times I was critical of him. And when you're critical of Donald Trump, you do get an army of people coming after you, and you have to think about how to handle that where it doesn't affect your how much you respond and whatnot. That is something that I do not think a lot of journalists are excelling at right now. They seem to be, well, just in general, they seem to be getting whipped up into frenzies when Donald Trump goes after them, and he's clearly showing no signs that he's going to back down. So maybe think about our strategy and how we handle it.
What did you make of Barack Obama? It's if we didn't have Fox News on in the bars, we would have had a different result.
Yeah, I'm really wondering what his understanding of bars are, because I love going to bars, and there's not really a lot of cable news on in those.
It's an untapped market for us. We've got to look into that in our ad sales. But it is a bit hypocritical of Barack Obama now to be taking this like, oh, you know, I've got the vapors over Donald Trump and the First Amendment when he has spent 8 years blowing off this network and attacking us relentlessly.
Well, I think sometimes there are personalities on this network that could give as good as they got with him, right? So
that's fine.
Fine.
Our editorial page doesn't like him.
Right.
That's fine. Sean Hannity does not need to like him. That shouldn't make him refuse to speak to the journalists of Fox News, which he did. And as you well know, that's what Donald Trump gets in trouble for doing. He doesn't like the editorial page, so he punishes the reporters.
I'll tell you something that happened in that history of that is that in 2009, when he cut Fox, he didn't do it. Some staffers at the Treasury Department cut Fox out of the
And the other networks stood shoulder to shoulder with us and said no.
And on the AP and James Rosen, again, several newspapers, including mine, did editorialize against it. And I think, you know, the question is now what happens. I think that the press is never going to act as a monolith because we all have competing interests and we want to beat each other every day.
Yeah.
But sometimes hopefully there will be times when the reporters in that press room, when they think that something is, you know, not being answered or whatever, or people are getting cut out, they stand together some.
Megan,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I believe President Obama was the biggest enemy of the press since Richard Nixon. In 2009, when he went after Fox and said Fox is not a legitimate news organization, and he tried to get ABC and other people to go in on it. I wrote about it. And here's this guy at the Baltimore Sun. Politico called me up and said, you know, you're the only mainstream journalist who says Fox is legitimate. Are you a true believer? And I said, yeah, I'm a true believer in democracy and the fact that the executive branch of the government does not get to say who the hell is a legitimate member of the press. You got to stop this. He was going full tilt on that thing. And it was finally when that Treasury Department press session, when they didn't let him in, that everybody came together.
They were giving interviews to all the networks in the
and
pool,
they didn't invite him.
except for Fox. And the other networks said, you can't do that.
And in fairness, Jake Tapper, who was at ABC, was one of the first to break and call him out on that, to give him credit, because I was so happy to get the cover of somebody from a network at that point, because they were saying, you should be really worried that you're out there with Fox. It was outrageous. I'm serious. Obama and what he did to James Rosen, the Times and Fox, outrageous.
But the
Look,
thing
they criminalized it.
So Donald Trump's going to take it to a new level. Barack Obama tried to delegitimize Fox. That didn't work out very well for him. Donald Trump is going to try to delegitimize the entire media. But Molly, your point is the media has helped him. They've helped delegitimize themselves. And there's a reason why the country doesn't trust them.
Right. This is the problem with how we handled ourselves throughout the last year. So many of us were so extreme and so overt in our partisanship that people don't really necessarily feel like Donald Trump needs to be particularly deferential to the media. And in fact, it's always important to have the media being able to investigate and hold someone accountable. So this is a somewhat treacherous time. And Donald Trump being able to communicate.
It's like the boy who cried wolf. Because
it's nothing but the boy who cried
right?
wolf.
These organizations who like were apoplectic over every little thing he did over the past 16 months, no one's listening to them anymore.
Right. And also the breakup of the media environment where Donald Trump can kind of go by the gatekeepers and just communicate with people directly through Twitter also decreases that public outcry for transparency and press conferences and whatnot. And I think it's harder for the public to see how it's important to have those where you're directly getting to ask questions or having sit-down interviews when he's constantly talking to us through these other means.
On top of all this, you get the fact that he is a master communicator. He is a master communicator and very effective at, penetrating the lens, connecting with an audience. So it's going to be an interesting ride. Stay tuned, because it's not unusual for the president-elect to call out the media for being biased, crooked, even untruthful. And up next, we'll show you how the media is returning the favor. And we continue our conversation now on Trump and the media with a look at how some outlets are now reacting to the attacks from the president-elect. Huffington Post writing about, quote, why Trump's war on the media is a danger to our democracy. The Denver Post writing, quote, Trump's disregard for the press, like Clinton's, is dangerous. And the website Vox declaring, quote, we have 100 days to stop Donald Trump from systemically corrupting our institutions. Joining me again, Dan Abrams, Chief Legal Affairs Anchor for ABC News and founder of the Abrams Media Network. And one of their websites is Mediaite, which we like a lot. Also Law News, which I really like. Oh, sorry, I'm off on a tangent.
No, this is good. Promotion is good.
It's good for legal stories. I don't remember a lot of those people defending Fox when Barack Obama spent 8 years coming after us. I don't remember them talking about the First Amendment implications.
Yeah, look, I think that you can argue there's a difference, though, between Obama going after Fox and Trump talking about changing the entire way the media covers the president. Criticizing Fox, you can disagree with Obama. You can say it wasn't helpful to him. Donald Trump criticizing the New York Times or whoever. I think those two are equivalents, right? But my greater concern is what Donald Trump is talking about doing in terms of marginalizing the media as a whole.
It's already happened, hasn't it?
Yeah.
He's already done it.
Yeah, basically saying, I'm not going to let the media be the check on me. And, in a situation where the media has historically been the place that represents people in asking hard questions, in getting answers from political leaders, from putting people in power, their feet to the fire. I think if you view it from a macro perspective, that is scary. Now, if they start tinkering with, do they give a daily briefing or not a daily briefing at the White House, I don't think that's that big a deal.
But do you think that some of how this goes is wrapped up in how well he does as president? Because if the economy doesn't start roaring, and if these folks in particular in manufacturing and so on in middle America and the Rust Belt don't get the jobs that they were promised, maybe they do start listening more with an open ear. Maybe they can hear skeptical coverage in a different way.
Yeah, look, I think that right now Donald Trump is in his honeymoon period, as much as it's going to be, which is that he's got a group of fierce supporters who are thrilled for what his election represents. And part of what that represents is anti-media.
Yep.
It represents putting the media in its place. These people who think they can tell us, who they think they know better than us. Okay, fair enough. The message has been heard. With that said, to fundamentally change what the media does vis-a-vis the president is scary stuff to me. When you start saying, you know what, I'm not going to hold press conferences. Again, pick and choose, when you want to hold them. But we got to have regular press conferences. We got to have a regular way.
I don't know if we got to.
Well, I think we got to.
Right? I don't know. I don't know if we're going to get him.
Oh, no, I don't know that we're going to get him either.
But I think, if you look at the past year when he was running for the office, you almost had some journalists who had access who had to be a little softer on him because he would cut off access if you were tough on him.
Yep.
There are some exceptions, but for the most part, I think that was the rule. And then you'd have people who were free to cover him skeptically when he deserved it, not when he didn't. And it's almost like we're seeing a bifurcation of the media that have access and don't, and a difference in the coverage. I mean, can that system possibly sustain?
Yes, it's not a system that I particularly want to see, but I think it's where we're going. The one thing I'll say for Donald Trump is that he'll change his mind about people. Meaning,
yes.
you know,
Yes.
he'll say, this is the worst, most awful person, media entity in the world. And then there'll be a nice article about him, or someone will approach him.
He was saying that about CNN, and then I saw Melania and Anderson Cooper that night.
Right. So no, he is willing to forgive. But we don't want this to be all about, did you say nice things or not about Donald Trump? And therefore, that's going to determine the coverage.
Do you think it's because he genuinely gets mad at these media organizations, or because he wants to delegitimize them because he knows critical coverage is coming, and it's easier if he paints with this wide, brush to just say, they all suck, you can't believe a thing they say?
Yeah, I think the effect is definitely what you're saying there, which is it's delegitimizing the media as a whole. I don't think that it's as plotted as that. I think that Trump just tends to respond and react and say what's on his mind. And what's on his mind has typically been to be able to do what he wants, right? He's been a very powerful, rich person for a long time who has been able to not worry about what anyone thinks about him. And as president of the United States, right?
Sounds lovely.
But as president of the United States, you have to care. It matters what other world leaders think about you. It matters what the people who you represent think about what you're doing. It matters how Congress and the Senate views. I mean, these things matter. And as a result, I think it's really important that we not accept this idea of completely delegitimizing the media and just sort of throwing everyone into a bucket and saying, well, we can't trust anything, so forget it all.
Most reporters make very little money. They do it because they love the First Amendment. They love being responsible to their readers or their viewers or their listeners, and their heart is in the right place. There are some who are in a different kind of business, but I hope people will keep that in mind. Dan Abrams, a pleasure, sir.
Megan, great to be with you.